So today we're going to meet the Smiths. Have you ever met the Smiths? We're going to meet the Smiths. But before we do, I want to bow our heads for a word of prayer, if we could. Dear Heavenly Father, I just pray that you will hide me behind your message, Lord. It is your message. It's a work in progress, and I'm a work in progress. And Lord, help one thing that's become clarion and clear to me, the faith of Annie and Uriah and what they gave to the early church. We thank you for everything you've done, and we thank you for working in their lives. And we ask that you'll continue to work in our lives as we listen to your message. In Jesus' holy name, amen. Annie Smith, right? You've heard her songs. Turn to hymn 441. Turn to hymn 441. You going there? Go there with me, please. We sung it. We sing it all the time on Heritage Weekend. We talk about it and how cool it is. And it was written in 1852 when she first moved to Rochester. And it says, I saw one weary, sad, and torn, with eager steps pressed on his bow, with a hallowed cross that he had bored, still looking for the promised day. With many a line and grief and care upon his brow was furled. I asked what buoyed his spirits up. Said he, the blessed hope. This song was actually called The Blessed Hope when it first appeared in the hymnal in 1852. It is about the founders, and it is a tribute that Annie paid to them in this song. And this was written in 1852. And we will come back to it in a few minutes. But I'm amazed. Annie wrote 45 poems. She dies at 23 in 1855. So right now, she's 23, 24, and she's writing this poem. And notice how this poem has at the end of it each time, even though people go through a lot of things in life, and Annie wrote about that, what does she call people's minds to every single time at the end of the verse? The blessed hope. What is that blessed hope? None other than Christ. So let's start talking about these people. There's not, this is a life, I said, cut short. She was a poet. She was a painter. She was a teacher, copywriter, and editor for the Review. And I'm amazed that when we think about how we think about these young people coming to Rochester, giving their all. And then Annie gets her life cut short at 27. She dies of tuberculosis. You see, James White wasn't really concerned when he asked her to come. He wasn't concerned that he asked a woman to come and work. I imagine, when you think about Ellen White, when you think about her, and you think about James White coming to Mount Hope in Rochester after Higher Medicine buys them the printing press. I say buys them because he had a loan of $659 at the time. That was a lot of money. But let's go back. Let's go back in time. Annie Smith. Jim Nix writes about her in the Adventist Scrapbook and the Adventist Review in 1976, and he says, 137 years ago, the Adventist Review has had a woman at the head of its staff, and the first to serve the church was a talented young lady named Annie Smith, Annie Rebecca Smith, the older sister of the famous Uriah Smith. I like the way he says it. 137 years ago, the Adventist Review, we'd say now 180 years ago, James White asked her to be the editor of the Review. He asked her to come. But let's back up a little bit. Annie White was born in 1828 in West Wilkin, New Hampshire. And along with other Millerites, she waited for the Lord to come in 1844. She was all excited about 1844. But she gave her heart to God before 1844. Did you know that? In 1838, she was baptized into the Baptist Church. And that's where she began her love affair with Jesus. When Jesus didn't come in 1844, she didn't know what to do. So she alternated between studying and teaching. She loved to paint. And one time, she painted the skyline of Charleston and Boston. And she did such a good job, but she strained her eyes and she could barely see after that. And it really caused her some problems for detail. She wasn't very good with it. But somehow, she started doing that. And after 1844, what do? Jesus didn't come. So what do? You had all your hopes set on Jesus coming, and he didn't come. So Annie, like so many Millerites, went back to her original life, went back to what life was like. Her faith started to wane in Jesus, and she would teach in district schools for the next 8 years. I want you to understand that this is the time that people are starting to search, why didn't Jesus come? During the time 1844 to 1848, people didn't know what was happening. They didn't know what was going on. Why didn't God come? They had the evidence out here in Port Gibson, New York, of what was happening, but she didn't know. She didn't know about that. So she started teaching, and then she started taking classes at a ladies' female seminary in Charleston, Massachusetts, where she studied French and oil paintings. But she had to decline a position when they said, "You are so good at this. Will you teach at this?" And she said, "No, I can't. My eyes won't let me." So she had to decline that position. She was very discouraged, and some friends convinced her to come and stay with them in Charlestown, Massachusetts, in 1851, which is the suburbs outside of Boston, Massachusetts. And she stayed there. She stayed there for a little while. And 1851, Millerites who thought Jesus was coming, do you know they went off into crazy things back then? There were some Millerites that got involved with this crazy stuff, and they said, unless you become like little children, Jesus will not come. So what they started to do was they crawled on the floor like little children. And then others said, oh, no, he really came. He came spiritually, but he didn't come physically. And everybody was a mess what was happening. And some people, they just started setting dates. I know in Rochester, New York, there were about 1,000 people who met at the Talman building over here in Rochester, New York, off of Main Street in Fitzhugh, where that building is, where the Frederick Douglass Memorial is. About 1,000 people met in the Talman Hall, waited for Jesus to come. When he didn't come, they said, oh, it's okay, he's coming in the spring of 45. And then they said, oh, he didn't come. They published it, he'll come in 46. And then some people said, oh, he's going to come in 1848. And then 1850. And they had all these dates, and, fortunately, Annie didn't get caught up in any of this foolishness. She and her brother just stopped really being involved spiritually until one day. Her mom and Ellen White said, hey, there's this message. Why don't you come and hear it? She said, I don't know. I don't know. No. Come on. You need to attend these meetings. It'll answer what happened in 1844. By this time, the young group of Sabbatarians, Joseph Bates, White Edson, had the answer why Jesus didn't come to the earth. And in 1844, remember when Hiram Edson had the vision out in the field of why Jesus didn't come? He went to the most holy place. He, Crozier, Edson, and Hahn, they all three of them wrote up the article in the Day Dawn in the Canandaigua, 1845, and they published it. And Joseph Bates got to reading it, and then he read it in the Day Star, and he said, "This is it. This is why Jesus didn't come." So Joseph Bates had now been preaching on this for like 3-4 years, and guess what? He's in the suburb preaching in Boston in 1851. And guess who's in that suburb where he's preaching? Annie Smith. Now, isn't that kind of cool? Okay? See, God cares about his people. God cares personally for his children. As the eyewitness account is told the night before the meeting, Annie had a dream. Now imagine this. Annie had a dream that she'd arrive late to a meeting, she'd have to sit in the back at the only seat that was vacant, and she'd hear a preacher talk about the issue of the sanctuary. Well, that's pretty interesting, isn't it? But that same night, God gave Joseph Bates a similar dream, and he dreamed he was speaking that night, and he should speak that night. And when he was speaking, a young lady would come late, sit in the back row, and he's supposed to talk about the sanctuary. Now imagine their surprise when she walks in late, and what is he preaching about? Come on, he's preaching about the sanctuary. God told him to preach about the sanctuary, and he told Annie Smith, you're going to hear about the sanctuary. God put Annie Smith in the back row of the church, and that was the only seat that was left, and that was the only seat that was left in her dream. Does God love his children? Does God make divine appointments? You betcha. Well, to their mutual surprise, but not God's, that divine appointment came true. The following night, Annie and Joseph Bates found out both their dreams came true. And the logicalness of the message made sense to her. And can you imagine having the dream and then that happening? Wouldn't that kind of cement your idea about, yeah, maybe I need to listen to this guy? So 2 to 3 weeks later, she gets really serious and she accepted the Sabbath. And she became a Sabbatarian Adventist. So what does she do a little while later? She writes her first poem and she sends it to the review. Now, hopefully you got your Bible out, right? Because we're going to look at her first poem in the review. And her first poem is called Fear Not, Little Flock. I want you to turn to Psalms 18:2. Fear not, little flock. Psalms 18:2. That's our first text. The promise stands sure, the kingdom he'll give to those that endure. Who wrote that? David. And you know when he wrote those words? After he had been coronated, told he was going to be king, and Saul was chasing him. And David wrote the words, Christ is our rock, a rock and my redeemer. Isn't that interesting? How about the next verse? The next verse of the poem goes, the armor gird on till victory is won. Let us manually fight the millennial morn. Soon will time's dark night. Will end dark. Okay. The millennial morn soon will end time's dark night. There it is. The armor gird on till victory is won. Do you know where that's from? Put on the whole armor of God, Ephesians 6:11. So as James White is reading this poem, look at this one. Well, no, let me go back. Listen to this one. The truth will prevail, its beamings we will hail, and his might and power 'twill shield us from harm in the dark trying hour. Though the tempest loud rave and high swell the wave, let us never give over, for the ark will land safe on Canaan's fair land. Then rapture untold our eyes beheld, our glorious King with bright golden harps, a new song we shall sing. That new song she talks about is Isaiah 42:10, Psalm 40 verse 3, and none other than Revelation 14:3, where God gives us a new song. But look at this one. Turn with me to Revelation 2:7. They will that city view, his commandments that do. Who did Jesus say is going to heaven? If you love me, obey my commandments. There's the commandments. With the angel of light, to the tree and the fountain of life have right. What does it say in Revelation 2:7? To him that overcometh, they shall eat of the what? Tree of life. There it is. This, and then look at the last verse. Hallelujahs will raise our Redeemer to praise, with pure and blessed. In Eden love we will be forever at rest. Who's singing that song? The 4 and 24 elders up in heaven, right? Well, what do you think happened once she sent this into the Adventist Review? James White looks at this, and he said, this is great stuff. She is very talented, yes? I want her to come and work for us. And that's what happened. He read the poem, he published the poem, and James White was so impressed by her poem, he invited her to Saratoga Springs, New York, and says, I want you to help me publish the Review and Herald. Is that cool or what? Quite an audition, right? Guess what Annie said? No. She declined. Ellen White wrote, why are you declining? What is wrong with you? We want you to work for the Lord. We want you to spread your message. She said she couldn't come because she has bad eyesight. Ellen White told her, please come. We'll pray for you like we're supposed to. So they did. She came to Saratoga Springs, New York. They had prayer session for her. They anointed her eyes, and guess what? She started to see well. Is that cool or what? God wanted her not to work at that academy or at that seminary teaching French and oil painting, because she wouldn't have been in Charlestown to meet Joseph Bates to learn the message to become a follower of Jesus. Do you see how God closes doors and it doesn't seem right, and it takes a few years before he opens them? Sometimes we think, oh man, God's taking too long. Listen, Ellen White wrote, with strong faith and fervent zeal, she entered heartily into the work. She rejoiced in the newfound truth. The whole current of her mind was changed. Nobler aspirations took possession of her heart. From a position of exaltation and honor among men, she had now turned her eyes to the inheritance of incorruptible, undefiled, reserved in heaven for the followers of Christ, and to take a place at the redeemed before the throne. Her contributions to the Review, while it was published in Saratoga and afterwards, in her volumes of poems entitled Here and Now, show the themes upon which her mind delighted to dwell. But Annie moved with the Whites when they moved from Saratoga. She moved with them to Rochester, New York, to 124 Mount Hope Avenue. She then moved with them when they moved from Mount Hope Avenue. They were only there for like a year, 9 months, a year. And then they moved over to Monroe Avenue off of Union and Monroe. It's still yet around today. You can still yet go see where the home was. It's no longer a home. It's other things. But J.T. Orton lived next door, and a lot of the review workers would work at J.T. Orton's house, and then they come over to 124, or they come over to 301, Monroe Avenue, and they'd work at the printing press at the home of James and Ellen White. But her time was cut short because of her father's illness in 1852, so she left the review and went home to take care of her father in November, but unfortunately her father passed away in December 1st of 1852. So she's at home trying to think about what to do, and she gets offered a job. Not only does she get offered a job, but her young brother gets offered a job, who's about 19 at the time, very smart individual as well, and they get offered $1,000 a year to go run the Exeter Academy let me get that right. The Academy in Mount Vernon, New Hampshire, the Exeter, whatever it's called, in New Hampshire. So what does she do? She says, "Thank you very much for the lovely offer, but I'm going to go make my money at the review." No. She was in love with Jesus so much that she said, "No, the money isn't the issue. I want to serve the Lord." By the way, just so you know, that academy in Mount Vernon, New Hampshire, that she was supposed to take over, it was a Christian academy. They were trying to bring her in because of her spiritual influence. They wanted her to come in and turn things around. They offered her $1,000. That's a lot of money back then, folks. In Rochester, she comes back in 1853 and she starts to work. But she'd have to leave in 1854. One time, she wrote this, life wasn't all trouble at the review. She wrote one time, it's called the Review and Herald Proofreader. The ode to the proofreader. "I'm a proofreader, here I stand with a weary brain and trembling hand. Perplexities by the dozen comes, while errors thicken round my home. The editor's profound mistakes confound me till my poor head aches. And worse than this, all the typist's care, invert each letter here and there. The review waits, I must proceed, though doubtless I can read. For blunders I cannot control, most sadly aggravate the soul." You know when you found out you made a mistake when you published the old-time reviews? When you published them. Every letter had to be turned upside down. To be able to read it, to put it, they were upside down. And they were read the other way. Can you imagine doing that? Being the proofreader, editor? Some have remarked, some historians have said, because of her editorial skills and assistance to James White, it established the credibility and the reach of the Review and Herald, which became one of the most important publications in the Adventist movement. During the Rochester time period, I can absolutely say, after reading through the different things I've read, that the articles and materials published in the Adventist Review helped shape the theology of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And while J.N. Andrews, Bates, and Whites receive a lot of recognition for it, Annie White was the one who actually made sure their words made sense on the page. Okay? They just talked it. She actually made sure it made sense on the page. Her brother would take over the leadership after she dies in 1855, and you cannot underestimate his theological contributions. For over 50 years, he's going to take over things and control things. So I want you to know, Annie had a deep desire to be a part of the Adventist mission. She and her brother turned down that great paying job in the academy in New Hampshire. And despite battling tuberculosis, she worked for the mission of the church. And she gave everything she had till her dying day. 2 days before she died, she was still yet doing things for the review. That's incredible. Her personal sacrifice and dedication to the cause of spreading the Adventist message serve as an example of faithfulness. Even if we're facing personal hardship, we still yet need to know that we can be there. This book, Home Here and Home in Heaven, has about, I don't know how many, it's like 70 pages. And it has all of her poems that she's written. She wrote poems for Nathaniel White when he died. She wrote him a poem of tribute. She wrote Anna White a poem of tribute when she died. Lumen Maston, she wrote. She wrote Robert F. Harmon, who was the younger brother of Ellen White, who accepted the Adventist message and died in 1853. She wrote a tribute to him. She was always thinking of others. Annie's last poem. Oh, shed not a tear over the spot where I sleep. For the living and not the dead, ye may weep. They mourn for the weary who sweetly repose, free in the grave from life's burden or woes. I long now to rest in the lone, quiet tomb, for the footsteps of Jesus have lightened the gloom. I die in the hope of soon meeting the friends that I love, and with him to reign. I was thinking about this because I know, and I'm not, I know we're having a memorial service for Lois, but for Lois it's going to be, bloop, her eyes are going to be open, she's going to see Jesus. She's going to say, oh, where'd the time go? Ralph, same thing. He's going to say, oh. They're probably going to say, hey, how long did you last? I don't know. I'm here now with you. Imagine that. That's what it's like to die in Jesus. We have this promise of sleep, and then we wake up, and the first face we see is who? Jesus. Is that awesome or what? She would take that. And she planned her funeral down to the last degree. People said it was a very interesting funeral. They had never attended anything like it before. She had the people who she wanted to speak. She had everything all set and everything all done. And her book, that home book, this book, got published 2 days after she died. Her brother was trying to get it back to her after they had printed it. He was trying to get it back to her, but she died in the process. And he sent, this is the amazing thing, Uriah loved Annie so much that she said, will you take this to Rochester? We're talking New Hampshire. That's what, an 8-hour drive? Times that at 15 miles an hour on buggy, you got a little of a travel. And he's like, yeah, I'm going. And she said, oh, there's some mistakes. You need to take it back and do it again. She did. He did. And finally, the final count came out 2 days after she passed away. So that's Annie Smith. Oh, sorry. Let's go to Uriah Smith. Uriah Smith, what can we say about him? I find it quite interesting about Uriah Smith. And we'll get back to Annie, by the way, a little bit back to her. I want to talk about some Uriah Smith, and then we'll get back to the observations about Annie's impact on him. So let's meet him. You've heard of Uriah Smith. How many of you have heard of his famous book? What's it called? Daniel and Revelation, right? That's about the thing we know about, right? But did you know he's 4 years younger than his sister? He was equally talented. He was born in 1832, so he was 12 years old when his sister was 16 going through the great disappointment. But when he was 4 years old, he got his left leg became infected. It got ulcers on it. and it started to shrivel. And it was just half of the size of this leg. And he had walked around with it like that for a while. But 12 years old, guess what happened? His leg started to really shrivel. His knee locked, so he couldn't bend his knee. And the ulcer started back up again, the open sore, open wound. The doctor came over and said, well, there's not much we can do for you. What we're going to have to do is we're going to have to remove your leg. Can you imagine telling a 12-year-old you're going to have to remove their leg? So the morning of the operation, he's at the hospital. No. He's laying in bed. No. He's laying on the kitchen table waiting for the doctor to come in and cut his leg off. Now, I don't want to get too gruesome, but I just want you to know he's 12 years old. There's a knock on the door. It's the doctor. He has his tools. He comes over to the table and he goes, yeah, we're going to have to take that off. He said, you ready? What's a 12-year-old to say? I have no idea about this, okay? I can't even fathom this. But I do know that his mom went like this over him, covered him with her black hair, and she started praying and singing to him. Then the doctor went to work without anesthesia. 20 minutes later, he said, I'm finished. Can you? I don't know about you. I'm fainting at just the first 2 minutes without anesthesia. I can't. I cut my finger the other day when I was cutting some veggie meat, and I sliced my finger open. You know how your finger really bleeds bad? I went into my wife at 4 o'clock in the morning. Honey, it's really bleeding bad. I can't stop it from bleeding. And if you know anything about Howard Krug, he kind of faints at the sight of blood, so it's not a good combination, okay? I'm starting to feel kind of queasy, so I lay down on the bed for a few minutes. I have to go to work. And I'm thinking to myself, this is not good, this is not good. And I couldn't get the bleeding to stop. I put a double Band-Aid on it. It kept bleeding and bleeding and bleeding. My wife said, well, you got to take a shower, and then, we'll clean it off, and we'll see. I can't even imagine what that felt like. But here he is, 12 years old, and he got his leg chopped off. What do you do? He was quite remarkable, because he invented a prosthetic leg. He invented a prosthetic leg that not only had a bendable knee, but also had a bendable ankle. So you could go like this. It was used, if you notice the date on this, that it was patented as when? 1863. This was used by a lot of Civil War soldiers. They were blessed because of what happened to him. It's amazing to me. This man, Uriah Smith, he was so talented. He had 6 patents. 6 patents. And one of them was a folding desk chair. I don't know if some people remember this kind of chair or not. I don't know if you do. But basically, it kind of folds up like this to move out of the way, and you can use the back of it. And he invented this in 1876 for a school. A place called Battle Creek College, which would become Andrews University eventually. Okay? Uriah Smith was very talented. Very talented. And he was very humble. There was one story about he was walking into the review, and one day, and this minister was sitting there, and this minister had no leg. And he was missing a leg. So he thought that he was being slighted by Uriah Smith, because Uriah Smith just walked by him and didn't even notice him. Uriah Smith didn't really notice him because he was engaged in his reading like this. Uriah Smith used to have a sign on the top of his, at his office. You mind your business, I'll mind mine. That's just the way he was, okay? But he had heard that this minister, Sands Lake, was very upset that he felt slighted. So when they had communion the day at work, he said to the young man, "Can I please wash your feet?" And the young man said, "Yes." Can you imagine the young man's surprise when he found out Uriah Smith had only one leg when he washed his feet? And he said, "Oh, I am so sorry. I thought you were being too uppity to notice me." He said, "I'm so sorry." You know, sometimes we take offense at somebody because they don't notice something about us. We don't have to be like that, okay? We don't have to be like that. Now, Uriah Smith also had some crazy ideas. I'm sorry, this one's kind of crazy. Do you see this? It's not really crazy when you look at it. It's called a horsey headless. He came up with the patent in 1899. The idea was to put a figure of a horse head with a lifelike attitude, so as the motorized car approached a horse, the horse wouldn't get scared. Not a bad idea, right? Because back in the day, the cars on the road weren't they rattled, they popped, they banged. There was all sorts of noise that would scare a horse. So Uriah Smith had the idea, well, what if we just have a horse in front and it won't scare the horse? Kind of a cool idea, right? So that was one of his ideas. His accomplishments, oh my goodness, Uriah Smith, his accomplishments. He held the position as Secretary of the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventist 5 terms. He was the longest serving editor of the Adventist Review and Herald, now called Adventist Review, for 50 years. He was the General Conference president for 1 term. He was ordained into gospel ministry in 1874. And with James and Ellen White, he co-founded Battle Creek College. I did not know that. And then he taught Bible classes and ministerial workshops and chaired the college board. I did not know that either. He wrote lots of publications. You all know Daniel and Revelation. And this one I thought was interesting. He worked for equality and freedom of consciousness. He always supported Ellen White. Publicly in the Review. He never got after her like she got after him. He never said bad things about her at all. He advocated religious liberty, staunch religious liberty. Before the abolition of slavery, before slavery was abolished, he was totally against it, like many of our founders were, and non-combatancy. He was involved in that. And I often think, he lived to do such wonderful things. His publications. Look at all of his publications. I don't know. There's too many there to look at. And if you look, you think, man, he did a lot, didn't he? I mean, he took key theological debates. Smith contributed to the discussions of Adventism, role of salvation. He helped with David Arnold come up with the idea of tithing and governance of the church. He came up with that. His seminal work, Thoughts on Daniel, he came up with the 1260, 2300 days. He really flushed that out. He wrote hymns. We sang one of his songs, "Oh Brother, Be What? Faithful." And what year was that written? Anybody know? 1853. The same time Annie's writing a song, he's like, oh, I could be like Big Sis. And he writes a song. Do you understand what I'm saying? Annie's influence upon him is huge. Your influence, young people, upon your younger brothers and sisters, it is huge. It is huge. You got to remember, folks, our influence upon our children is huge. We have a duty. Now, Anna White, she dies from two things. Okay, this is me. Okay, can I be a historian and meddle a little bit? I'm sorry, thank you. Annie Smith. Annie Smith dies from two things. One is she dies from tuberculosis, and the other one she dies from is she dies, I think, from a broken heart. Okay, what do I mean? Ellen White writes in her account of Annie's life, on the account of sickness of Annie and the family where she boarded, she assisted in the kitchen where it was warm for a while, and there was a warm stove. And there was a consequence of a letter being left, so she hastened it to the office, and she ran to the office from where she was. She wasn't ready for the cold. Had she returned immediately, like she should have done, all might be well. But she stayed through the day and night working there and became very cold and chilly. That cold undoubtedly seated itself immediately upon her lungs and threw her into night sweats and a hard cough, which ended her life. We know that for sure. We also know that Anna White, Annie Smith passed away because she had a certain crush on somebody. I think her emotions and not thinking clearly caused her to not go back and to not get the things she needed to get, which was the warm jacket and stuff like that. So she stayed and she got chilled and she passed away. And that's one of the sad things about life. But I want you to know that Annie's influence upon her brother cannot be underestimated. And I just want to leave you with the following thoughts about her influence, and I'm closing right now. Number one, Annie Smith worked closely with James White, spreading the Adventist message. Her brother watched her do this. He watched her editorial skills. He helped her with how she edited the books. He helped her with doing things. She was a prolific poet. Many of her poems published in the Review and Herald often talked about her deep spiritual convictions and the hope of Jesus' return. These poems resonated with the early Adventist believers, and they became an encouragement and an inspiration during difficult times. I think the way she faced her death was a testament to her love of Jesus, but also I think it weighed heavily on her brother. Because her brother didn't always agree with everything that the Adventists were selling, and she's the one who brought him in. Because of her, he became what he is. She wrote songs. He wrote songs. She wrote hymns. He wrote hymns. She wrote poems. Guess what? He wrote poems. The younger brother wanted to be like the older sister. And while Annie Smith doesn't get a lot of credit for what she did, I hope you've met her and you've fallen in love with her, because she was an awesome older sister. And we need to remember that as we move on in life, that our witness is powerful, no matter who it's with, no matter who you're witnessing to. Remember, people are watching you all the time. And that young little boy watched Annie Smith and her commitments to the Millerites, watched Annie Smith and her commitments to the Whites, and then he became committed to the Adventist gospel and worked with the Whites throughout his life. Isn't that kind of a cool story? So I hope you enjoyed meeting the Smiths. We're going to sing How Far From Home right now. So let's go.